All right, let's focus on white blood cells now, right? So before we talked about different blood type. So if you remember, as before, so if I draw my little bone here, you got the bone, you have the bone marrow, right? And you have these specialized cells called hematopoietic stem cells, right? And these hematopoietic stem cells give rise to all of our blood cells. So our red blood cells, white blood cells, self-fragmented cells like the platelets, right? Through a process depending on what cell type you're looking at, right? So hematopoietic stem cells give rise to leukocytes, right? So leukocytes are white blood cells through a process called leukopoiesis. So leukopoiesis. So leukopoiesis means the rise of the birth of leukocytes, right? So leukocytes, there's two specific types of leukocytes. So the first type are the granular. You have granulocytes, and you have versus agranulocytes. And the way they're really distinguished is based off of these specific types of granules that are present under a microscope. So when you look under a microscope, you can see these little granules that are present, and that is the primary way of distinguishing the first lineages of these white blood cells, the granulocytes from the agranulocytes. All right. So when we look at granulocytes, there's three specific types I want you to know. It's neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Right. So if we look at number one, you have the neutrophils. So neutrophils are the first type of immune cell for any kind of infection. They're the most prevalent cells, right? So they're the most common, they're the most abundant, right? And these neutrophils, as soon as there's an infection, neutrophils migrate immediately to the site of injury, so any kind of inflammation or anything, right? Neutrophils also protect via certain kinds of enzymes, right? So we have these defensins. All right, so let's use blue. Defensins. Defensins are these little hydrolytic enzymes that play a role in breaking down certain bacteria, right? Neutrophils are also phagocytic. What does that mean? Phagocytic means that they will engulf any kind of particle, pathogen, and either destroy it, right? Or send it off for another kind of identification through the immune system, right? You have neutrophils. Now, next we have the eosinophils. So eosinophils are the cells involved with allergies and asthma, right? So allergies, asthma, these are where you have eosinophils. Eosinophils are also present for the destruction of specific type of parasitic worms. So any kind of parasites that are worms that are present, right? And another thing that's really important about them is they secrete certain kind of chemicals to promote the immunogenic responses. So the first is heparin. So heparin is a anticoagulant. So what does anticoagulant mean? Coagulation means forming a blood clot. Anticoagulation is preventing a blood clot, right? So heparin prevents blood clot formation, right? You have histamine. So histamine has many functions, but in this case, we're going to focus on its increased permeability of the blood vessels. Blood vessels are held together by this phenomenon called tight junction. Histamine relieves this tight junction, allowing for the actual immune cells to reach that origin of interest instead of going through that whole pathway, right? So if I were to draw it real quick, so you have the blood vessel here coming in, right? And you have these immune cells that need to go to this target. So if I have this target, you have all this inflammation, all these cytokines, right? So when histamine comes in, this leads to these actual blood vessels to become more porous. So when they become more porous, these immune cells can just migrate directly into that region in order to create some kind of immune response, right? And also, eosinophils secrete serotonin. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter for regulation of mood, but also is a very important regulator for vasospasm. So any kind of blood vessels that need to be constricted, serotonin is released, right? And then the third type of granulocyte that we talked about here is the basophil. So basophils are synonymous to mast cells. So mast cells are responsible for allergies, right? So basophils' main function here is secretion of also histamines, right? They are the lowest abundance of leukocytes. So they are the least amount, right? So you don't see that many basophils if you ever do any kind of histological analysis. So if you look through any kind of blood smears, very difficult to see blood smears, right? So we just did granulocytes. Now let's look at agranulocytes. So agranulocytes here, we can talk about, there's two specific types. There's lymphocytes. So you have lymphocytes. So these are all the cells that are present in the lymphatic tissue, in lymphoid tissue, so lymph nodes, right? So there's three types. You have T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells. And each of them play their own specific role of generating either an innate or an adaptive immunity. And the second type of cell, these are called the monocytes. So monocytes are the largest white blood cell in terms of size and diameter. They differentiate into macrophages, and their main function is phagocytosis. So these are basically just showing you the general aspects of white blood cells.